September 7th, 1940. Above the Thames estuary, radar operators watched their screens with growing disbelief. The formation approaching wasn't the usual 50 or 60 aircraft they'd tracked all summer. This was different. 300 bombers, escorted by 600 fighters, flying in a column 20 miles wide. The largest aerial armada in history, heading straight for London. But this massive force represented something the radar operators couldn't see. It represented a fundamental miscalculation, a strategic pivot born from frustration and faulty intelligence. Because 2 weeks earlier, Adolf Hitler had believed he was winning. August 24th, 1940. The Luftwaffe had begun what Hermann Göring called Adlerangriff, Eagle attack. Not against London, against the airfields, the fighter stations and sector control rooms that formed the backbone of RAF Fighter Command. Manston, Limpner, Hawkinge, Biggin Hill, Kenley, Hornchurch, North Weald. The names, that mattered. The places where Spitfires and Hurricanes took off, where controllers directed them to intercept, where pilots landed to refuel and rearm before going up again. The attacks were devastating. At Manston, on the Kent coast, the runway cratered so badly that the station became unusable. Hangars collapsed. Operations rooms took direct hits. At Biggin Hill, the sector station controlling much of the air defense of London, bombs destroyed the operations block, killed 39 people, severed communications. The station's WAF telephone operators, some barely 20 years old, kept working through the raids, plugging in connections while buildings burned around them. Flight Lieutenant Tom Gleave watched Manston burning from his Hurricane's cockpit. He'd landed between raids, taxied past wrecked aircraft, past fire crews hosing down fuel fires, past ambulances collecting the wounded. The smell hit him first. Aviation fuel and cordite and something else. Burning rubber. Burning paint. The acrid chemical stink of a modern war. He counted 7 craters on the runway. 11 destroyed aircraft on the ground. The station's brick buildings, built to last a century, reduced to skeletal walls in an afternoon. "How long until we can operate again?" he asked the station commander. "We already are," came the reply. They were filling craters with rubble, marking safe paths with white tape, launching fighters from grass strips between the holes. Manston would be hit again the next day, and the day after, and it would keep launching fighters. This was the pattern across southern England. Kenley took a raid that destroyed 10 hangars and killed 100 people. Hornchurch lost its operations room. North Weald's runways looked like the surface of the moon. But the fighters kept flying. Pilots took off from cratered runways, landed on grass, refueled from trucks when the fuel lines were cut, got their orders by motorcycle courier when the phone lines went down. In Berlin, the reports coming to Hitler's desk painted a different picture. Beppo Schmidt, the Luftwaffe's chief of intelligence, compiled assessments from raid reports, from pilot claims, from photographic reconnaissance. His numbers showed RAF Fighter Command collapsing. On August 24th, he estimated the RAF had 350 operational fighters. By September 1st, he revised this down, 250. By September 4th, he told Göring the RAF was down to its last 100 fighters, perhaps fewer. These numbers were catastrophically wrong. RAF Fighter Command actually had over 700 fighters operational in early September. The British aircraft industry, dispersed and working around the clock, was producing 470 fighters per month. More than the Germans. More than the losses. The RAF was getting stronger while Schmidt's reports showed it dying. But Hitler believed the reports. Why wouldn't he? They confirmed what he wanted to believe. What? The entire German command structure wanted to believe. That overwhelming force would break British resistance. That modern air power could win wars without armies having to cross the Channel. That Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, would proceed as planned. Göring reinforced this belief. He visited Hitler regularly that August, bringing news of victories. "The RAF is finished," he told Hitler on September 2nd. "A few more days of pressure and they'll have nothing left. Their airfields are destroyed. Their pilots are exhausted. They can't sustain these losses." Hitler had reasons to believe him. The Luftwaffe had crushed the Polish Air Force in days, had swept the French from the skies in weeks, had driven the RAF from France at Dunkirk. Why should Britain be different? The airfield attacks were clearly working. Reconnaissance photos showed the damage: craters, burned hangars, wrecked aircraft. What the photos didn't show was the repair crews working through the night, the engineers filling craters with anything available, rubble and earth and broken concrete, the ground crews patching aircraft that should have been written off, getting them airworthy with salvaged parts and improvisation. The WAFs maintaining communication by any means necessary, running phone lines across open ground, relaying messages by hand when the lines were cut. What the intelligence reports didn't capture was the system. RAF Fighter Command wasn't just aircraft and pilots. It was an integrated air defense network. Radar stations on the coast detecting incoming raids, observer corps tracking them inland, sector control rooms directing fighters to intercept. Even when individual stations were damaged, the system adapted. Controllers moved to backup facilities. Squadrons operated from satellite airfields. The network bent but didn't break. Group Captain Tom Gleave, commanding No. 11 Group's sector at Kenley, saw both sides of this reality. His station had been hit hard. Buildings destroyed, personnel killed, aircraft wrecked on the ground. But when German bombers approached, his squadron still scrambled, still intercepted, still fought. "We're holding on by our fingernails," he told Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commander of 11 Group. "But we are holding on." Park knew how close they were to breaking. Not from lack of aircraft, from lack of pilots. Fighter Command had lost 103 pilots killed between August 24th and September 6th. Another 128 wounded. Many of the wounded were Burns cases who would never fly again. The pilot training schools couldn't replace losses fast enough. Squadrons were flying with 15 pilots when they needed 26. Pilots were flying 4, 5, 6 sorties per day, going up exhausted, reaction times slowing, making mistakes. But they were still flying. That was the crucial fact, the fact that German intelligence missed, the fact that would change everything. August 25th, 1940. Night. RAF Bomber Command sent 81 aircraft to bomb Berlin. The raid was small, poorly coordinated, caused minimal damage, but it shattered a promise Hermann Göring had made to the German people. "No enemy aircraft will fly over the Reich," he declared. Now British bombs were falling on the capital. Hitler was at the Berghof, his mountain retreat, when he received the news. Witnesses reported he went silent. Not the raging fury he was known for. A cold, calculating silence. He called for Göring. The conversation wasn't recorded, but the outcome was clear. Britain would pay. September 4th, 1940. Berlin Sportpalast. Hitler addressed a crowd of nurses and social workers, a carefully selected audience, for a speech that would be broadcast across Germany and monitored in Britain. He spoke about the British bombing of German cities, about women and children killed, about the RAF's terror attacks on civilian populations. Then came the threat, his voice rising, the familiar crescendo building. "If they attack our cities, we will raze theirs to the ground." The crowd erupted. "We will stop the handiwork of these night pirates, so help us God." More cheers. The hour will come when one of us breaks, and it will not be National Socialist Germany. In London, intelligence analysts translated the speech, noted the shift. Hitler was threatening retaliation against cities, not against airfields or military targets, against cities, against civilians, against London. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, commanding RAF Fighter Command, read the translation with mixed feelings. The attacks on his airfields were killing his command slowly. If the Germans switched to bombing cities, they would kill civilians. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, but they would also give his fighter stations time to recover, time to repair, time to rebuild. It was a devil's bargain no one had offered him, a choice he couldn't make. But Hitler was making it for him. September 7th, 1940. Late afternoon. The massive German formation crossed the coast. RAF controllers scrambled every available squadron. Pilots expected the usual targets, the airfields, the sector stations. They climbed to intercept, looking for bombers heading toward Biggin Hill, toward Kenley, toward Hornchurch, but the bombers weren't turning toward the airfields. They were flying straight, following the Thames, heading for London. Squadron leader Brian Lane, flying with number 19 Squadron, watched the formation pass beneath him. 300 bombers in tight formation, their fighter escort weaving above. "Where the hell are they going?" someone asked over the radio. Then they saw the target. The London docks, the warehouses, the East End. The bombers opened their bay doors and the first bombs fell on civilian London. The raid lasted 2 hours. 448 civilians died, 1,600 injured. Fires burned across the docks, visible from 50 miles away. That night, 250 German bombers returned, guided by the fires, dropping more bombs. The Blitz had begun. At Biggin Hill, ground crews worked through the night repairing the damaged operations room. At Kenley, engineers filled the last of the runway craters. At Hornchurch, communication lines were restored. The pressure was off. The Luftwaffe had stopped attacking the airfields. Hitler had switched strategies. Not because the airfield attacks weren't working. They were working. RAF Fighter Command was under enormous strain, closer to breaking than the Germans realized. But Hitler switched because he believed the RAF was already broken. Because Goering had told him it was broken, because intelligence reports said it was broken, because he wanted to believe it was broken, and because he wanted revenge for Berlin. The decision was catastrophic, not immediately. The Blitz would kill over 40,000 British civilians, would destroy vast areas of London and other cities, would cause immense suffering, but it would also save RAF Fighter Command. Within a week, the damaged airfields were operational again. Craters filled, buildings repaired or replaced, communication lines restored. Pilots got rest, fresh pilots arrived from training units, aircraft production continued uninterrupted. The system that had been on the verge of collapse steadied itself, and the fighters kept flying, intercepting the bombers heading for London, shooting them down in increasing numbers. The Luftwaffe's losses mounted. September 7th, 28 aircraft lost. September 8th, 15. September 9th, 28. September 15th, 56 aircraft lost in a single day. That last number was actually inflated. British pilots, in the chaos of combat, overclaimed significantly. But the trend was real. The Luftwaffe was losing aircraft and crews faster than it could replace them. The RAF wasn't collapsing. It was fighting back. Hitler received these reports with growing frustration. The switch to bombing cities was supposed to break British morale, force Churchill to negotiate, clear the way for Operation Sea Lion. Instead, British morale stiffened. Churchill's speeches rallied the nation, and RAF fighters were still in the sky, still shooting down German bombers. September 14th, 1940. Hitler met with his military commanders to discuss Operation Sea Lion. The invasion was scheduled for September 21st. 9 days away. The meeting was tense. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, commanding the Kriegsmarine, expressed doubts about crossing the Channel without air superiority. The RAF was still too strong. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the OKW, suggested postponement. Hitler said nothing definitive. He wanted to wait. See if the bombing campaign would break Britain. See if the RAF would finally collapse. See if Churchill would negotiate. September 15th, 1940. The Luftwaffe launched its largest daylight raid. 200 bombers toward London in the morning, another 150 in the afternoon. RAF Fighter Command threw everything available at them. 23 squadrons scrambled. The sky over London became a chaotic melee of aircraft, contrails, gunfire, falling planes. By evening, the RAF claimed 185 German aircraft destroyed. The actual number was 56, but even 56 was unsustainable. The Luftwaffe had lost experienced crews, bomber pilots who'd flown since Poland, fighter pilots who'd fought in Spain. These weren't replaceable losses. These were the core of the Luftwaffe's striking power. That night, Hitler received the casualty reports. He also received reports of RAF strength. Not from Beppo Schmid this time, from other sources. From Luftwaffe unit commanders who were fighting the RAF daily and knew it wasn't broken. From reconnaissance pilots who photographed British airfields and saw them operational. From signals intelligence that intercepted RAF communications and heard a functioning command structure. The RAF had not been destroyed, would not be destroyed. Not in time for Operation Sea Lion. September 17th, 1940. Hitler issued a directive. Operation Sea Lion was postponed indefinitely. Not cancelled. Postponed. The pretense maintained that invasion was still possible, that the Luftwaffe just needed more time, that British morale would eventually crack. But the decision was final. Hitler knew it. His commanders knew it. The Wehrmacht would not cross the Channel in 1940, would never cross the Channel. The moment had passed. Hitler never publicly admitted the failure, never gave a speech acknowledging that the RAF had survived, never explained why Operation Sea Lion was postponed. The official line was that weather conditions weren't favorable, that the invasion was merely delayed until spring, that the bombing campaign was achieving its objectives. But his actions spoke clearly. In the weeks following September 17th, he began planning Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the eastern expansion he'd always wanted. Britain could wait, could be bombed into submission, could be starved by U-boats, but it couldn't be invaded, not while the RAF controlled the skies. The Blitz continued through the winter. London bombed night after night. Coventry devastated. Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow hit repeatedly. The civilian death toll mounted, but RAF Fighter Command remained intact, grew stronger. By December, it had more fighters operational than in July. Group Captain Tom Gleave, recovered from burns suffered when his Hurricane was shot down in August, returned to duty. He visited Manston, where he'd watched the station burning 4 months earlier. The craters were gone, the hangars rebuilt. New aircraft lined the dispersal areas. The station looked almost untouched. "We were that close," the station commander told him, holding his thumb and forefinger an inch apart. "Another week of those attacks, and we'd have been finished." But they'd gotten that week, because Hitler had switched targets, because German intelligence had failed, because Goering had promised more than he could deliver, because Hitler had believed what he wanted to believe. The Battle of Britain officially ended October 31st, 1940. The Luftwaffe had lost over 1,700 aircraft. RAF Fighter Command had lost over 1,000. But the Luftwaffe had failed its primary objective, had not destroyed the RAF, had not achieved air superiority, had not opened the way for invasion. Hitler never spoke publicly about what he'd said or thought when the RAF kept fighting after the airfields were destroyed. No recorded statement captures his reaction to that realization. No diary entry or private letter reveals his thoughts. But his actions revealed everything. The postponement of Sea Lion, the shift to night bombing, the planning for Barbarossa. These were the words of a man who'd recognized failure, who'd understood that Britain would not be conquered in 1940, who'd moved on to other objectives because this one had become impossible. The RAF had survived. Not because it was stronger than the Luftwaffe. It wasn't. Not because British pilots were better. They weren't necessarily. But because the RAF had a system that could absorb punishment and keep functioning. Because British industry could replace losses. Because intelligence gave accurate assessments of strength and capability. Because commanders made rational decisions based on reality rather than wishful thinking. And because Hitler had made a crucial mistake. He'd switched strategies at the moment when his original strategy was closest to success. He'd believed intelligence reports that confirmed his assumptions rather than questioning them. He'd sought revenge for Berlin when he should have maintained pressure on the airfields.